Welcome to the Sunday's Game, a special live edition coming all the way, well, partly from Moscow, the other part from Malaga down in the sunny south of Spain. I'm on board PRO of the Games Europe, and in literally 2 seconds, even less when I click this button, we're going straight to our chairperson and secretary, the two Johns. Boys, this could be a good double act. Like, you've got two Ronnies and now we've got two Johns. There are the two Johnnies, though.
That's it. The two Johnnies, yeah. We're just not from Tipperary, thank God.
Oh, that is a good thing. I think the Cork leash, like, kind of acts as evil, works very, very well. I think that's better than everything else.
Yeah.
Listen,
no, you look great. Don't worry.
No, John, you look lovely. John always checking, do I look great? You look great, John. John Murphy, I'm going to start with you just in this one. This is our first in-person since 2019. How did it go?
Yeah.
How did it feel to be sort of like back together fully, like, especially with online and offline as well?
It's nice to be back, right? 2019, I wasn't chair, so this is my first one in person, and I think the energy was like wonderful. I think we spoke about this Wednesday, Thursday night when we chatted, Alan, before the convention, was like coming out of the youth conference last week, youth workshop last week. There was palatable energy. I think it was again the same today. Like, we got through a lot of work. Like, fortunately or unfortunately, the motions is never like the sexiest part of this job, but it needs to be done. So I think, we had some great discussions on that. There was some good attendance in person. There was some new people that have come along to maybe the opportunity to come in person. So yeah, delighted to be back in person.
Yeah, it's great to have a face-to-face meetings with delegates from all over Europe. We have people joining online as well, but you can't really beat that. This socializing and contact between the delegates from all around Europe and our county committee, some of which I haven't met, who've been on for more than 2 years since COVID began. For example, our Camogie officer, Fiona, from Vienna. I've never met her in person before. So these bonds are being formed now, and we can move forward. And we've got 4 new members on the committee as well, two were elected today. So looking forward to 2023.
Just to back on White, now we mentioned the other day as well, and I know it was brought up as well at convention today, the workload that comes on, especially through the secretary role. That's so. John White, how much more difficult has it become with so many people involved at the committee level and with clubs as well?
Sorry, can you come again?
Talking about the workload for you.
Yeah. The workload is always it's a very high workload. You're always getting emails coming in almost every day of the year, possibly at Christmas. That's part of the job. As I said in my report, it's long term, it's not sustainable. Maybe we'll have to look for some help with that in the future. That's part of the job. Europe's getting bigger, more and more clubs, more and more administration. We're hoping to give more delegation out to the regions, where they can take on this administrative work as well. So let's see how it goes in the next year or two.
John Murphy, just can you run through some of the motions that were brought up today? Some of the ones that, as you said, they're not always sexy, but they're also, many of them are very interesting and very pertinent to our work and our growth and development, continued work, growth and development. What stood out for you today in terms of motions that were brought forward to convention?
Well, I think there was a selection of tidying up, right? There was some stuff that over the last few years maybe had gone out of use or out of purpose. So there was about like removing them or just simplifying, right? So the stuff that's already in the official guide in the GA, we don't need to replicate that or repeat it, right? So it was nice to kind of get some tidying up, so some clarity, some simplification. So that was one tranche, like we said, not the most glorious thing to do, but it helps long term. I think the big two for me were probably the youth ones, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely, yeah.
getting, to reduce the playing age, and obviously we have to bring this forward to Crow Park to approve it, but allowing players instead of being 17 but 16, so reducing that a year. That passed. There was a strong appetite for support on that, which would give us a pathway from under 6 up to Fela and then into adulthood, which is marvelous. And then the other one then we have to work with the associations at home is around letting girls play up till under 15. In Ireland, it's only under 12, but we believe that we want to keep as many playing for as long as possible, and allowing girls to play under 13, under 14 Fela in European competition helps facilitate that. And to be honest, most of the clubs already, the girls and boys are training together, so it's just about recognising that hard work that the clubs put in. Anything from you?
Yeah, so them two were passed actually today. They were two big ones, all right, from one side. Basically, also the rule would be that for the training together, that would be actually under the LGFA rules and the Camogie rules.
How much of a difference, John, White, would that make with those rules, like amalgamating the rules? How much of a difference would that make in terms of playing for people?
Yeah, I think for the developments, especially for youth clubs around Europe, or John said, they're already training together. This would be an advantage for them when they move then from youth up to adult level, that it won't get lost somewhere in between. That you have that already happening in 17-year-olds.
Looking at just with the lowering of the age, Sean, I know that not all people were happy with that when it was being discussed before coming to convention. Do you think that there might, like that, maybe in Ireland there will be some pushback on that, because the whole thing, player burnout, that they say player burnout, too young and so on, but the difference is we don't have the games. We don't have the games. Like, so it's not like a 16-year-old is playing under 16s and then minors and then junior or something as well. Compared to 30 games or 40 games a season at home, it might be only 10 games in Europe. So how much of a chance would this have of getting kind of adoption in Dublin?
Well, I mean, it's a deviation, right? So they obviously have the opinion about how the games are structured in, we have our development planning and training officer just jumped in. So Tony's back involved and on this. So sorry, digress. I think we have to work on it, right? Like, I think we need to help them understand the perspective, right? It's not like we have under 15 development teams, right? Cork has probably 5 development teams. We don't have that. So I think it's about us explaining the rationale behind it and the reasons. And then I think there's I'm confident. I think that's my job now. The clubs have spoken. So now it's on us as the county board to actually follow through and do the politicking to help get this over the line. So I think with both of the youth ones, there's going to be some work on us. I think the clubs have spoken. Now it kind of falls on us to follow through. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think it's an education process. And, that's one of the things that European representatives for the last 20 years we're doing every time we go back to Ireland. We're trying to educate that things are different here, different philosophies, different perspectives. And, we need to convince them of that. And that's not as easy as it sounds.
No.
Because they're very rooted in their own experience. And that's understandable too.
Tony, Tony Bass, our training development officer. Tony, in that, do you think that the fact that Europe still has to go back to Ireland, is that a good thing? Number one, and second, will it change when we start to become self-financing?
Yeah, there's a number of perspectives.
Loaded question, Alan. Good job.
Sorry. I know, listen, it's a discussion.
If you're self-financing, you have a lot more flexibility, admittedly. Having said that, the GA is not structured like other international sports federations. It's basically an Irish operation with a growing international. As Joe McDonough, who passed away a few years ago, I was a great supporter of international units. As he said, you call it the international dimension. And, in some ways, we're still at that level. We have to remember about 4,000 odd clubs in Ireland. And, we're still less than 1,000 around the world. But in time, And it may not be in our lifetimes, but you know, there will be a time when Ireland's just another country in the International Gaelic Games Federation. And things will, the perspectives will change over time. And I suppose, you know, 19 years ago, in my first convention, I came in and, you know, became county secretary, whatever, and I went back full of passion, whatever. And they just didn't understand it. And I had to learn that you have to bring people slowly along. And repetition. It's say the same thing over and over again to people, and eventually you get through.
It's just, what is it? The definition is sanity is doing the same thing, expect a different result. It's just before insanity, isn't it? Right? There's just that one, like, we repeated this a few times, and then it clicks, and you're like, oh, thank God, because we were on.
Yeah, we were almost on the borderline of insanity.
It's
certainly been there.
It seemed that, I mean, looking at the list and list of the people and so on.
Sorry, can you talk up a little bit, Alan?
Sure, John. So looking at the list and the attendees today and the people who are there, the balance is certainly tipped to the non-Irish born or non-Irish native side. That's a very, very good thing. I mean, and it shows that, you know, the more people are involved, more people are sharing. As you said in your address, going local.
What was the last bit? We're
going local, as you said in your address.
We're going local.
And that's a very, very positive thing.
Yes. Yeah, I think, you know, being a Cork man, the accent's going to have to adjust. So, you know, there'll be elocution lessons between now and my next call. No, look, I think this is where we're going. You know, Tony there talked about the international dimension and what the future of that is. We've 400 million people in Europe, right? So I'd be remiss of us to only talk about the 80,000 Irish people, or maybe the 20,000 that played GA at home, right? Like, there's so many waves of expansion here that, like, we could be, who knows, in 15, 20 years, you know, having, especially with the explosion of technology, the idea that we could have real-time translation, you know, into Spanish, into French, right? So as the chairperson is addressing then, that the individuals would either have kind of like the UN, right? The earpiece doing translations or something on their screen, right? So, like, yeah, it's going to be very interesting as it develops.
Tony, on that, I mean, you've been, you're with GGE a long time, and you've seen the growth, as we mentioned on Wednesday. 105 clubs more in the process of registration. I'll ask you this first, and I'll come back to John with his view on it. Where is the border? Where can Gaelic Games Europe go to? Of course, becoming a province, we know that, but where can it go to, Tony?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that today, that I've always had it in my mind that eventually Europe will become like a province and the countries will become like counties. And, you know, I don't think we're that far away from it yet. It'll take a bit of convincing back in Ireland because they're very rooted in structures which are 130-something years old at this stage. And we're only at it 20 years. So we're only babies at this stage in terms of where we're at. But, you know, the interesting thing is, like, you know, I've seen it develop from being an exotic sort of PR thing from time to time to actually now having structures like World GAA. So things change, you know, and they might change always as fast as we'd like them to change. But one of the great things about the GAA at home, or in Ireland, I should say, is that it changes too. And change sometimes is iterative, sometimes it's dramatic, like opening up pro parts of the sports or whatever. But if you actually look at it, the GAA has been very responsive to the challenges in the society as it developed in Ireland, and it's increasingly becoming so from an international perspective.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
John, on your view, where can Europe go to? What is on the horizon?
I mean, you want me to talk about aspirational or like
exactly
tangible, short term?
No, I think both, John, because I mean,
right.
You know, like, we've come so far, and then where do you see as being the next step, and where can it go to?
Where can we go to? I mean, replicating and enhancing the Galician and Brittany school projects, right? That it's in multiple provincial and educational boards, right? That, like, we're exposing thousands of kids every year. And what I mean by enhancing that is then facilitating a pathway, right? So it's one thing to train up the kids, it's another to start getting them into the clubs, right? So you're going to be very busy. But like that, right? Like, you know, Yano and Galicia, right, talk a lot about focusing on this 10 to 12 range, right? So that's going to take probably 5-10 years, right, to materialize. And we'll learn along the way, but that's kind of a long term, right? So you're talking about replicating that success in, you know, in the Netherlands with us, in Belgium, like, we have great games. They sell themselves if people become aware. So from a high level aspiration, I don't see why we couldn't have 60, 80, 100,000 kids every year exposed across Europe to Gaelic games. But then again, we'll need to pull up our socks and build the structure for that, and the clubs need to, you know, probably pivot a little bit to, you know, align with kind of what would be almost like a feeder system in like sports, right? The schools become the feeder system for the clubs. But in the short term, I think we need to get this strategic plan, like get the foundation. 2023, there's a lot of work in it for us in terms of setting up around like regionalization, game structure, you know, building that commercial viability and that commercial engagement. So yeah, I think the next year will be a lot of heavy lifting, but the aim is to put, you know, the structure in place to get to that aspirational level.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, we're going to have to look at things like, I mean, the regions we've had, that was introduced, fully enough, I often say it was a 2006 pilot scheme from a games perspective. It has evolved into a governance perspective as well. But I mean, we should look now, I mean, for instance, maybe we need 10 regions with clubs, you know, more clustered.
Yeah, sub-regions.
I wouldn't rule it out, you know, whether it's sub-regions, whether it's regions as they exist or whatever. You know, and I think we should always be flexible enough to meet the evolving needs. And I think in fairness to GGE, and before that European County Board, has been able to do that. Yeah. And has been like, you know, I often say like 19 years ago, we had 14 teams playing 7-a-side men's football and the occasional hurling match. And then we introduced ladies football. And then we introduced camogie and the clubs grew. And we evolved to 11-a-side. Whether we need to be 11-a-side or maybe come back to 9-a-side because that's standard in other units. You know, these are all things that we have to factor in. And I think, you know, we do a pretty good job of it. You know, sometimes we're a bit hard on ourselves where we should be actually patting ourselves in the back and say we've actually achieved a hell of a lot in a relatively short space of time when you look at the overall continuum.
And I think that, you know, well, we won't get an argument for how many aside in football. We have different opinions, but I think, like you said, it's very hard to predict in some regards where, like, you know, would you have thought 19 years ago you got from 14? Was it 90?
No, I obviously not.
So that's what I mean. But like, what I'm saying is,
I remember 5 or 6 years later, sort of, we had a couple of years of massive growth where we were adding 5, 6, 7 clubs, and you're doing a sort of a projection, which is saying, well, exponentially, we'll be at 200 clubs by 2020. Now we didn't, but sometimes you need to set a stretchy target to get people focused. You know, we have to look at issues around like, do we develop clubs on the basis of they, you know, sort of grow naturally because there's a group of people who decide to start a club, or mostly good lunatics, or do we become more strategic and say we have a gap here, we need to go in and find out how do we get a club going there? Do we piggyback on the university system, or do we get into physical education colleges, you know, where the teachers are? I remember 13 years ago doing a session with Dutch PE teachers, and you even learn from going to these things, because then I realized, okay, they don't do school sports the way I use school sports. But I'd never be despondent. I always go back to my own club in Coola in Dublin, which is now a huge, massive club and winning Club of the Year and things like that. 29 years ago, 30 years ago, we started a nursery on a Saturday morning with 7 kids, because we had 1 juvenile team and 2 adult teams at the time. Now, the adult teams were flying, they were winning county hurling championships. But then there was a dip because there was nothing coming. But now that club is fielding 130 teams. And a few years ago, I travelled back from Myanmar to see us win a Club All Ireland, which we couldn't have conceived of when we started nursery with 7 kids on a Saturday morning. If you sow the seeds and you nurture them, they grow.
But we're talking a completely different beast there, because, for example, as John mentioned, you know, when we have primary schools, like we do the recruiting early, get them in young and keep them with clubs. But in Europe, it's a very, very different thing. How can we adjust that Irish model? Because we're not going to get, you know, like in Michael Bridges and Blanchetown, we're not going to have, like, you know, all the schools in the whole area field 1 or maybe 2 teams in a Saturday competition every week for 20 weeks. How can we adjust it, John? How can we sort of, that's a question for both of you, how can we adjust it to Europe to make it work? Because we're not going to get masses of kids coming out. The kids of the Irish you know, and then some interested local kids. But how can we get that sort of involvement going?
Well, I suppose one of the other, you know, where we deviate from home is we also don't have multiple clubs in a city. So even, right, if you talk about at Coronia where we had the European Pan final, like they've one club, right, for us, right? So, or you go to Amsterdam or Maastricht, right? These are cities with large populations. So you don't need to get into every school. You need to have a very good relationship with maybe one school or a handful. So, and then they will attract it, right? So we're not also competing, or we're not in a situation currently where we have multiple clubs. Well, probably the one exception in Berlin, who have Vigo, yes, sorry, thank you. 2 places where there's multi-club, but the rest are kind of, they have a monopoly, right? So they're not under the same obligations to nab every child with a hurling, you know, in their neighborhood, make sure he's signed up for them and that's their first club. So yeah, I think, look, I think when you talk about where we deviate from Coola and what's been in Ireland, I think it's, you don't have the same pull. Now we'll compete with obviously other sports, but we don't have the same parochial boundaries. We also need perfect word for we also don't have, you know, we'll also need to localize the language, right? The kids, like, I think this would be a very interesting one to develop about, you know, do the kids learn Gaelic games in English to help improve their English, or do we localize it in their language to help them pick it up? So that, I think, will be very interesting to see how it swings, right? Whether it's a combination, or I think it'll probably be tweaked in every region.
Yeah, and it will be different from country to country, city to city. Every club in Europe has a different story. Many of them, you know, they evolve in all sorts of different ways and things. But I don't think we should ever say there's one model fits all. There won't be. There never will be. Because even within the countries in Europe, you have different systems. You know, the larger countries, they have federal systems.
Yeah.
And they vary from one, like in Germany, from one lander to another. Yeah. That varies. And even how they organize their education systems. So, you know, this is one of the things we need to look at. Do we, say, for instance, focus on getting into teacher training colleges, where they will take the sports out for us? Yeah. Because that would maximize, you know, that you might get more bang for our buck doing that. Yeah. But then again, you know, you have some countries where you have a school sports system. You have other countries like the Netherlands, where their job is to introduce kids to as many sports as possible. So they don't really develop a school-based, school-against-school type competition.
They're not big into the tribalism.
No, so, you know, there's just different cultural approaches to things like sport. Sport in particular actually generally reflects the culture of the country. And it's a matter of adapting your sports development to the cultural development of the country and what works. Because the motivating factor in one place is not the same as the motivating factor in another place. Which makes it both more challenging, but also more flexible.
It is horse for courses. John, on that, in terms of with localities and so on, Tony mentioned it with universities as well. What can GGE do, for example, to help with, for example, facilities or pitch rental? Because one of the biggest issues that most clubs have, and I heard actually some people mention it today, just with renting a pitch, is there a way that, you know, that GGE through, for example, just within the European Union, is there a way that there could be assistance given down, or can GGE lobby for that, like, say, for example, in Brussels?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, a bit of background noise here, but I think you're talking about how we get access to facilities. I suppose, like, you know, like Tony alluded to, it's getting in with universities, building up relationships there. You know, I think we've talked about this a few times on the County War calls recently, right? Like, so you have getting in with universities, building up that relationship, getting into, you know, maybe new clubs or declining clubs, right? Clubs that need numbers, whether it's soccer, rugby, or other sports where, you know, it's advantageous for them to maybe get us kind of under their banner to go to their local municipality and say, hey, look, we've added another 40, 50 people, we need more funding. There's obviously, you know, what we're talking about now, which is polo grounds. That's run this out a lot to clubs, right? There's a lot of equine polo around the county. Those pitches are used in Asia for tournaments. I've done the measurements. It'll fit 250 in a side pitches, side by side. So there's that, or maybe 311s, I don't know. But I looked at it from a 15s perspective. You know, Ren work with the local lower income house families, right? It's kind of a quid pro quo. They get their pitch. that actually was derelict. So they were huge in terms of they found a space that was grass that was safe or like available. They put in permanent fixtures there. Then they worked with the municipality around a quid pro quo. We'll work with like underprivileged kids, for cheaper rent. We'd be here all night.
I mean, one of the things that's noticeable in some countries in Europe is the declining amount of team sports, outdoor team sports. So, for instance, Netherlands, the Dutch the Dutch National Federation for Soccer and Football is really worried because they're having a drop-off in numbers of teams. So my own city, Maastricht, where there used to be 14 or 15 clubs, is now only 9 clubs, putting out less teams. And 40% less teams than 10 years ago. That means there's pitches available, which weren't available before. So we need to look for opportunities and be strategic about things.
Okay. No, I mean, that's all good advice, because again, when you've got teams who are trying to grow, like we're speaking with someone down in Spain last week, and dropped on, I think he's been on to you, Tony, that the whole thing was trying to get the money, because we all know we all put our hand in our pocket to help support our club. Wrapping up now, just ask you both, Tony, start with you. The biggest takeaway you got from this year's convention, what was the thing that stood out for you?
The tan.
Yeah, I mean, there was some sort of, from an internal administration point of view, does it make any sense moving conventions around? Do we need to look at how we restructure maybe how we do conventions, things like that? I've often thought it's not really fit for purpose. On the other hand, what's the alternative model? So, we've done the rotation around the regions. We went back to a central location. We're now trying rotation around the regions again. So there's things like that. But I thought what was really good today was that of the 19 conventions that I've been at, was there was a lot of forward thinking, a lot of challenging each other to think about different models for the future, particularly in the afternoon sessions. And we all have different views, and that's what we're here to throw in all the views, to see can we come out with some sort of consensus as to what we might do. And that's part of what we need to do as part of our strategy plan. We need to create the structures. And then, to a large extent, it'll be the regions and even more so the clubs on the ground who will grow the games. So what we need to be doing is supporting them in every way we can, and realizing that we have to do that in different ways in different places at different times.
Yeah, I say horses for courses. John, same question to you. What's your biggest takeaway from this convention?
Tony's tan.
No,
it's permanent. Class. Biggest takeaway, so I think this year we did kind of, like Tony said, we tried to condense the reports, the motions, and all of that kind of bureaucracy, I don't know, maintenance or, must-haves into the morning. And then in the afternoon, we had 3 topics of discussion. And like Tony said, it was class, right? We had one, I think the middle topic there around, bloody hell, I think my brain's fried. Competition. Like, we were talking about if we restructured the 11-a-side European champion. And you know what? It went from throwing out a few ideas to getting about 24 back, right? There was so many different opinions. And that's kind of what you want, right? You want people to feel engaged intellectually as well, like, or to go back and go, you know what, we didn't just discuss the bylaws, but we actually discussed these were super interesting. We talked about the World Games. We had a very good debate around the World Games and came to some very good, consensus and timelines for how we're going to go forward. So, like, to me, that the World Game, I think getting the World Games squared away was the big one. Or sorry, not squared away, but I think the principles are now nailed down. And then the second thing would be, getting this idea of the afternoon being used as kind of think tank, right? And to me, there's opportunity to do even more of them. We could get individuals in the future to talk about different topics, right? Whether it's PR, finances, how to run a club. Like, there's so much opportunity to use this as a vehicle for education for individuals and the county as a whole, right? So, that to me was, we tried this. We didn't have the chance, I think, when we were online. So I'm going to take my kind of tenure in, and probably the couple of conventions I was at before. Don't think this kind of...
No, I mean, funny enough, we went back to where we were about 10 years ago, where we almost had code workshops.
Yeah.
So we used to always meet Saturday, and then Sunday morning we do the voting and the elections and all that stuff. But that gave us a lot of flexibility. But then you need the attendees to do that. because it's very hard to do that sort of discussion brainstorming session.
Yeah,
breakout
rooms. Yeah.
hybrid session. So, but then again, looking, into the future, it may be that it'll be regions who will send delegates to the convention.
I mean, if you look at the structure of all the, this
if we're a provincial council, each of the countries as counties, if you like, in Ireland, will be sending a number of delegates on behalf of their area. Yeah. But the clubs will be sending their delegates to a national convention.
Yeah.
So again, there's all sorts of possibilities.
It's ours to write, Alan. That's ultimately the thing, right? Like we do, like Tony said, sometimes we're probably going to go back to things that worked previously that we oscillated away from, and now we're going to pivot back to. So to me, this is the beautiful thing about it, is we have a very dynamic county. So like we're going to ebb and flow as we need, right? So as much as, maybe in 50 years time, they'll be very regimental in the approach of Europe, but right now we're in the infancy. So much potential to kind of twist and turn as we need and as we see fit. So yeah, it's going to be exciting.
Yes, on that note, I think it's very, very positive. We'll leave it on that. Tony and John, I'll let you away to enjoy the rest of the night, to enjoy dinner as well. I'm going to just have a cup of tea and go to bed. So, well, actually, I've got work later on again. So there you go. Listen, thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your Saturday.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, Alan.
John Hoyes gives a shout out to.
We missed you this year.
All right.
We will
go out into the night, and of course we're back. We won't be we will be this Wednesday. We'll have a show on this Wednesday as well. So until then, I'm Alan Moore saying take care of yourselves and each other, and we're back on Wednesday with more this Sunday's